Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Welcome to 5 to Thrive Live, a podcast about thriving for those who have been affected by cancer and chronic disease. I'm Dr. Lise Alschuler, and I co-host with my good friend Carolyn Gazella. You can find all of our past show podcasts on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, iTunes, Stitcher, and you can find our schedule on ithriveplan.com. Well, tonight I have two guests with me. Lucky me, I have Laura Pole and Nancy Hepp. They're both from cancerchoices.org. You'll learn more about that organization. And we're going to be talking about vitamin D in the context of cancer. They're going to share some of the more recent research findings around this very interesting vitamin. So before we get to that, I'll tell you a little bit more about them. Laura Pole is Senior Clinical Consultant for Cancer Choices. She is an oncology clinical nurse specialist who has been providing integrative oncology, clinical care, navigation, consultation, and educational services for over 40 years. Nancy Hepp has a master's degree, recently retired after serving as the first program manager and lead researcher for content on Cancer Choices website, where she researches and summarizes the best available evidence on more than 60 complementary cancer therapies and lifestyle practices. Now, before we start our conversation, I want to thank our sponsors. And the sponsors are Immuse, a unique patented postbiotic that gives your immune system a key advantage. Immuse is an ingredient in many immune-supporting dietary supplements, so look for Immuse on the label, or go to amusehealth.com for more information. Also, Cognizin Citicoline, which is nature's way of keeping your brain functioning on all cylinders. So if you want to enhance your brain's function, your memory, focus, and attention, look for Cognizin on the label of your dietary supplement, or go to cognizin.com for more information. We also thank ProThrivers Wellness Supplements, including ProThrivers Wellness Brain, which includes Cognizin, as well as some other brain-supporting nutrients and herbs. You can find ProThrivers Wellness Brain online at pureformulas.com. You can also look for ProThrivers Wellness Sleep, a supplement which combines higher dose melatonin and other sleep-supporting natural ingredients, specifically designed for thrivers. And finally, Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics, a best-selling probiotic for over 30 years with 12 probiotic strains, which are shelf-stable due to a unique 3-year fermentation process, so no refrigeration required. And you can learn more at drOhhirasprobiotics.com. And with that, I would like to welcome Laura and Nancy. Hello.
Hello. Hello to you.
Well, I'm delighted to have you both on. I heard you give a presentation on this topic at the Oncology Association of Naturopathic Physicians Conference this last spring, and was very impressed with the depth, breadth, and sophistication of your review. And I know you did this review as part of your work with cancerchoices.org. So, Laura, let's start with you. Tell us a bit about Cancer Choices.
Yeah, so Cancer Choices, which actually started our pilot in 2015, so we've been around for 10 years now. We're a science-based and open access, meaning it's free, website that provides information and guidance on integrative cancer care to people with cancer, their caregivers, and the healthcare professionals who take care of them. And I would, maybe people in the audience know what I mean when I say integrative oncology, but just to clarify, that is the coordinated combination of conventional cancer care like chemotherapy, surgery, radiation, alongside complementary therapies. And I don't mean they're therapies that complement you or they're free, but they complement conventional therapy, like therapies like acupuncture or things like vitamin D. as well as combining lifestyle practices. So the three of those make up the three pillars of integrative cancer care. And we provide reviews of complementary therapies, like this review we did of vitamin D. We also have handbooks on managing symptoms and side effects, and handbooks on lifestyle practices that have benefit in people with cancer. We also have handbooks on how to optimize your internal body terrain to make your body less hospitable to cancer, along with lots of other information, but that's sort of the basics. And we're really excited that an independent review was published. It was a survey of 11 websites that offer information on cancer complementary and alternative care. And our site was given the highest rating for quality and trustworthiness of information.
That is fantastic. Well deserved. I refer patients to cancerchoices.org. I think it's a fantastic, very reliable, trustworthy place to get information. And you're going to hear a little bit more about why as we go through this review. So, Nancy, one of the reviews, obviously, is this one on vitamin D. So, first of all, just how would you describe the volume of research for vitamin D, specifically in cancer care, when we compare it to maybe the volume of research for other natural compounds?
Well, of the 25 natural products and supplements that I personally have reviewed, vitamin D by far has the most research that we were able to assess and summarize and compare and find patterns in.
Mm-hmm. Yes, lots and lots. So let's start with a very, very important, very kind of fundamental question. Does this body of research support a link between vitamin D deficiency and increased cancer risk?
Yes, for both cancer as a whole and for many specific cancer types, including the big ones of breast cancer, prostate, lung cancer, colorectal, and including several other kinds of gastrointestinal, skin cancer, kidney cancer, ovarian, thyroid, many kinds of cancer, yes.
Okay, so vitamin D deficiency increases the risk of major cancers. That is an important takeaway. And really, I think why so many more practitioners are, in fact, starting to test people for vitamin D. But we'll come back to that in a moment. Okay, let's just take it a step further for a moment. So, Laura, what's the link between vitamin D deficiency and cancer survival? So now we've already been diagnosed with cancer. Does it matter anymore?
Yes, it does. We found evidence from the research that we looked at of 9 different cancers that people who had low vitamin D levels don't tend to live as long compared to those who have sufficient vitamin D levels. I don't know if you want me to name the 9 cancers.
Yeah, go for it.
Blood cancer, breast cancer, colorectal, stomach, liver, melanoma, pancreatic cancer, prostate cancer, and renal cancer. And they might be finding more even as we are, speaking today. But that's what we found.
Okay, so we've got 2 very important take-homes. Vitamin D deficiency is associated with an increased risk of getting cancer and an increased risk of dying from cancer so far. So taking this sort of a slightly different tact, Laura, what does vitamin D sufficiency do in terms of the experience of cancer itself? Are there benefits from being vitamin D sufficient?
Yes, on several different levels. And I'll talk a little bit about each of these. There's a lower risk of cancer, less chance of dying from cancer, better chance of living longer if you have cancer, less problems with certain treatment side effects, improved effectiveness of some treatments. So starting with sufficiency in people who have bladder cancer, lung cancer, prostate cancer, and colorectal cancer. In women, there's a lower risk of these cancers. There's a lower risk of dying from colorectal cancer, lung cancer, and prostate cancer when your levels are adequate. There's a better chance of living longer in those who have lung cancer. Children who get bone marrow transplants, and if they have higher levels of vitamin D, they have lower risk of dying from that treatment compared to children who had lower levels. Also, we're beginning to see, we call this kind of preliminary evidence, better outcomes from immune checkpoint inhibitor treatment. As far as side effects and symptom go, in general, people with low vitamin D levels tend to have more side effects and symptoms related to cancer or their treatment. As far as treatment side effects go, people who have adequate levels may have less pain from aromatase inhibitor therapy, which is a really big deal, and less peripheral neuropathy caused by chemo. And though the evidence isn't as strong, when you supplement vitamin D in people who have low levels, they seem to have better bone health, less fatigue, less inflammation of the mucous membranes in their mouth, less atrophy of the vagina during tamoxifen. And I know you didn't ask about inflammation, but it's interesting to note that in people with a vitamin D deficiency who also have high levels of C-reactive protein, CRP, which is a marker telling us there's inflammation somewhere in the body, their CRP levels go down as you correct, but not overcorrect the deficiency with vitamin D supplementation.
Yeah, so this is really important. This is a bit of a nuance I want to just explain, because it's one thing to say vitamin D deficiency is associated with an increased risk of cancer and an increased risk of death from cancer, but one could still argue, well, that's not cause and effect. Maybe the cancer caused the deficiency, but this data that you just presented suggests that it actually is a causal relationship, or at least a contributory relationship, because when vitamin D is sufficient, all of those parameters change. Now the risk of cancer is lower, the risk of death from cancer goes down, and then, of course, all of the benefits that you just mentioned in terms of side effects, reducing, better toleration, better efficacy of treatment. So really important kind of overall, stamp of approval for vitamin D in relationship to cancer. Now, we can't go too much further without discussing what we're talking about in terms of the amount. So, Nancy, is more better? And are there any situations which indicate that too much vitamin D could be harmful?
Well, this is a very nuanced and complex answer, so forgive me for taking a little more time. More is not always better. The research we've looked at, and we have looked at hundreds of studies, and the patterns are very consistent across studies, that if you are deficient or insufficient, which is an intermediate category between deficient and sufficient. If you are below sufficiency, raising your vitamin D serum level is better on all of these parameters related to cancer. Once you achieve sufficiency, it's not at all clear that getting higher and higher and ever higher levels will bring you any further benefits. So once you've achieved sufficiency, you're not going to see much more benefit from raising your vitamin D levels further. And in fact, men show a very distinct U-shaped curve for prostate cancer and lung cancer, for both risk of cancer and for survival after a diagnosis, where people with the lowest vitamin D levels have a substantially higher risk of those two cancers, lung and prostate, almost double the risk of people who at sufficiency. But also, once the levels start getting too high, then also it goes right back up and you have an increased risk of cancer, 80 to 85% higher risk of cancer or cancer mortality at levels that are higher than just at sufficiency.
Right. So the little Red Riding Hood, the porridge, too small, too big, just right. We've got that situation going on with vitamin D. There's sort of a just right spot, that trough or the bottom of the U, as you say, in that U-shaped curve. Mm-hmm. So let's get very specific. Most people when they get their vitamin D level tested, it comes out as nanograms per milliliter in the United States. And there's some controversy about testing because it's not considered 100% accurate. There's like a margin of error. But that being said, when you say deficiency, what numbers are we talking about? And when you say sufficiency, what numbers are we talking about?
Okay, this is where it gets even trickier. Most, as you mentioned, most people in the United States get their numbers in nanograms per milliliter. But there is another unit of measure used, and that's nanomoles per liter. And that's what most of the published research uses. And if I wanted to design something to confuse people, I don't think I could have gotten better than calling one unit nanograms per milliliter and the other nanomoles per liter. They both start with nano and they both end with liter, but they are off by a factor of 2.5, so that 10 nanograms would be the same as 25 nanomoles. 40 nanograms is 100 nanomoles. So you really have to pay attention to the numbers and make sure that you're comparing the numbers and the units that you've gotten to the recommendations. So with that background, the numbers that we have used are from the Institute of Medicine, and sufficiency begins at 20 nanograms per milliliter or 50 nanomoles per milliliter, or I'm sorry, nanomoles per liter. So anything below that would be considered insufficient or even deficient.
And what would you consider to be the top optimal level? Because a lot of people now are supplementing with vitamin D and their levels go up and up and up. And you've talked about this U-shaped curve. Is there sort of from the research, any indication about a top level?
Yes, for men, especially for prostate and lung cancer, the upper limit where we definitely see an uptick is 40 nanograms per milliliter or 100 nanomoles per liter. There has been no upper margin identified for women, but very little research has investigated levels above that 40 nanograms or 100 nanomole level. So we don't know if there is an upper level, and we haven't studied enough women who are above that level yet.
Yeah, and I think to add complication to this a little bit is that, depending on somebody's condition, like if somebody has osteoporosis, their tolerance or their need for vitamin D is a little bit higher. The research seems to suggest that a higher serum level might be more beneficial. Same with immune deficiencies. But for the average person who doesn't have a condition, who's really looking to vitamin D as a prevention, I think your range of 20 to 40 is very sound. And that seems to be very scientifically backed up. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So is the best way to adjust vitamin D through supplementation? And again, this is I'm asking this based on your review of the studies. Like most studies that look at vitamin D and the impact of changing vitamin D on outcomes, are they using vitamin D supplements or are they putting people outside in the sun?
Most of them are using supplements. It's so much better to control. Our production of vitamin D within our skin from sunlight depends so much on our skin color, so that people with very pale skin will produce vitamin D much more quickly than someone with very dark skin, and the latitude and the season where we're at. So the further we are from the equator, and the season of the year, and how much direct sun we get, and how many clothes we're wearing, and all of those things will dramatically impact our vitamin D production. As a rule of thumb, your skin is not producing any vitamin D from sunlight if your shadow is not shorter than you are.
That's great. Okay. So basically, like 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., something like that?
And depending on the time of year. Now, I live north of Seattle, and we go from October until March, where my shadow is never shorter than me, even at noon. So it depends a lot on the season and your latitude, as I said.
Okay. And vegans are particularly at risk for vitamin D deficiency. Why is that?
Because
Sorry. Yeah, Laura, why don't you go ahead?
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm the foodie here, although Nancy's a great cook too. Because many of the foods that contain vitamin D are animal products, egg yolks, cod liver oil, fish oil, wild caught fish like salmon, organ meats like liver, butter. Now, mushrooms, even medicinal mushrooms that have been exposed to sunlight. Isn't that interesting? They can be a source of vitamin D2, but your body has to convert that to D3. And then there are, of course, the products like dairy products, OJ, soy milk, and cereals, which have had vitamin D added. But, it's not really, you're not going to get the amount of vitamin D you need just from food alone.
Okay. So how do you, this is a little bit off, kind of a riff on that, but how would you recommend that a vegan supplement vitamin D? I was recently introduced to vegan vitamin D from I think it's lichen, which was something I had not been familiar with. I understand there's supplements now that are available as vitamin D3 from lichen, but that's kind of new to me. Do you have any other ideas around that?
No, that's a good question, Lise. We're going to talk about AI in a little bit, but I'm going to have to look that up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I'm not a vegan, I never looked at my supplements to see, where the vitamin D was coming from. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Nancy, do you know?
No, this is new to me.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a new thing. Okay, so let's go back then. Laura, I want to ask you one more question about vitamin D. You talked about how reliable Cancer Choices is as a source of information, and so nowadays with AI increasingly entering into our lives, people are Googling and getting searches through ChatGPT or some of the other back engines. How would you compare that, sort of the integrity of that information compared to Cancer Choices? And in general, how do you advise people around doing the research using AI for vitamin D related questions?
Yeah, I want to, if you're sitting in front of your smartphone or your computer, go to cancerchoices.org and go to blog and community in the upper navigation column. We just published a piece on how to use AI to navigate cancer information. So some tips and considerations, because, and unfortunately, I hear that even the newer, supposedly more powerful versions of AI are hallucinating more, which hallucinating means it's making things up or putting things that aren't accurate. We're not there yet with AI being, and it probably never will be, faultless. And when you use AI in general, like if you go on Cancer Choices and use AI assistant, it's going to pull from within Cancer Choices. So, we consider that to be reliable. But when you just go to AI in general, it's going to pull from the universe. So it helps to know what you want to ask it. So, for instance, you want to have some details. For instance, I'll give you one. You want to explore integrative approaches to your cancer care. You can ask, I'm going to submit details about my specific diagnosis, and you are an integrative oncologist, so talking to AI like it is. And after I share my case, I want you to give me a list of complementary therapies that are going to help with my side effects and won't interact with my treatment. So you see how specific you need to be when you're doing an AI query. So when you just put more general things up there, it's just going to start pulling from everywhere, and then you have to keep prompting it to get more but they don't know. They're not trained to give you a right or wrong answer. It's just looking for patterns.
Right.
So they don't know if the answer is always accurate. So, like I said, if you go to trusted resources like Cancer Choices, ASCO, which is the American Society of Clinical Oncology, PubMed, About Herbs from Memorial Sloan Kettering is another place to get information about supplements and herbs. So you use some sites like that, you're going to get less of this problem from AI. So, now the first thing when you do a search on Google, the first thing that comes up, maybe it's good that it's not ads anymore, but it's going to be AI. So if you can get to Cancer Choices, and if the answer isn't there related to integrative oncology, then you can actually ask us a question, and we'll see if we can find you an answer on there.
Mm-hmm. I think that what you just said is, very important. Like these AI is not quite there yet. It's still generating, it's just amassing information and pulling it through with no critical analysis of the information, which is what humans are still better at. And that's what's really gone into Cancer Choices. I know you have a very strenuous process of creating the reviews and vetting them and making sure that they're very reliable. So thank you for doing that and putting all this information out there. So I want to ask each of you in our couple minutes left. I'll start with you, Nancy. Any final thoughts you'd like to leave with our listeners?
Yes, if you suspect or have any inclination that your vitamin D levels might be low, get tested. If you want to take vitamin D, but you think you might be sufficient already, get tested. So my bottom line is get tested and then work with your health professional to stay within a sufficient level without overshooting.
Great. And actually, I should have made this clarification at the get-go, but all of us have just been speaking about vitamin D, but in the way in which we're talking about it, we're actually talking about the circulating form of vitamin D, which is 25 hydroxy vitamin D, or vitamin D3 is another shorthand for it. People like us often just shorthand it to vitamin D, but just to make that point, because there is vitamin D2, which is available as a supplement. That's a slightly like a precursor to vitamin D3. And so I just want to make that clarification. So when you get your blood tested, like Nancy's recommending, you would be testing your 25 hydroxy vitamin D or your vitamin D3 level. And Laura, what about you?
Yeah, I will. I second what Nancy said. I navigate people with cancer, so I'm an integrative oncology nurse navigator. And if there's any supplement I ask about and encourage people to not necessarily to take it, but find out what your levels are and just ask. I just about advise everybody to check on that. I'll add my functional medicine primary care doctor. I was asking her about measuring my blood levels, and she said, well, we're going to measure it at the end of the summer. And if you don't have adequate levels from summer, you are certainly not going to have enough to carry you through the winter. But that's when it should be at its highest level. And that impressed upon me. And then your fat stores it. And then that tides you, through the winter. But yes, get your levels tested.
Mm-hmm. Great information. So if people are excited to learn more about vitamin D and other complementary integrative therapies, and they want to investigate Cancer Choices, again, the website?
www.cancerchoices.org.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. Really appreciate your work, your time tonight. And that wraps up this episode of 5 to Thrive Live. We thank our sponsors, Immuse Postbiotic for enhanced immunity, Cognizin Citicoline to help enhance memory, focus, and attention, Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics, award-winning pre- and probiotic formulas, and Pro Thrivers wellness supplements designed specifically for thrivers. Thank you, listener, for joining us. May you experience joy, laughter, and love. It's time to thrive, everyone. Have a great night.